Market. This is our daily show from Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. GMT, every day of the week, where we discuss all things to do with the modern market. That is the NFT market, the crypto market, and ideally how to make some or a lot of money on the internet. I'm your host, Bchek. I'm joined by my co-host for the day, Funky, great friend of the show. He is all about, if you didn't know already, living, loving, laughing, and learning. That's a lot of L's there. He runs guided weekly meditations involved in Kingdom Ventures. Great friend of the show, great modern market community member. Can't wait to get into a greater discussion with him and others who are on the stage with us or will be as we get into the show. But before we do that, just a reminder, as always, friends, nothing that we say here is financial advice. This modern market is exceptionally risky. We do not know anything for sure. Please do proceed with caution and exercise your own judgment. With that out of the way, Funky, how are you doing this Thursday, the 4th of January?
Jim, my friend, I am doing exceptionally well after being invited to be your co-host today, and really excited for the conversation. And one thing I want to say too, just for anybody who is listening, part of the L's is just a love of alliteration. I was a former teacher, which some of you already know, but and I love the intellectual humility as part of the disclaimer in the show too. Always a favorite part of the show.
we like the teachers, as people know as well. I am a former teacher as well, and we like that. I think we attract those intelligent, like-minded people, and that's one of the best things about doing the show, where we basically get a chance to create whatever it is that we innately create, right? Like, we are who we are. We just put our content out there, and we seem to have attracted a bunch of really like-minded, cool people. That's one of my favorite things about the show. One of the things that we want to kind of extend, actually, and this is a little bit of a pre-announcement maybe, is that we've just started the Modern Market Discord, which currently just has about 15 people in it because, as you know, me and Legendary had launched a project maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. We have some loyal NFT holders from that, so they've kind of migrated over, and then we're going to start rolling out some invitations for top listeners. Funky, a quick question on that. Where do you think the threshold should sit for top listeners to be invited into the Modern Market Discord? How many hours do you think people need to have spent listening to us in order to be in?
I think 50 is a good cutoff. At least if we're going to invite people in waves, we know that Kusho would obviously be at the top of that list. He may already be in the Discord right now. I don't know, but certainly would be worthy because he's eclipsed the 100-hour mark. And, I told him one of my goals for 2024 is to catch up both on hours and how many emotes, that I actually push into the show. So, but yeah, I think that's a good cutoff if you're going to, and then slowly roll out for more people. I don't even know if I've hit 50 hours. One of the things I love telling people about this show is that I started off as a casual listener, maybe about 5-6 months ago, and would just pop in from time to time. And it was because of Sammy, because I met him in the 1% Club. And then I was on another stage with Legendary. And then right after that I came to Modern Market that morning. He passed me the mic, and I feel like I've been on the show almost every day since. And it's really a great show. In fact, if you're here and you're listening with us and you haven't already done so, please go ahead and share the space. Let's get those comments in because that's going to help push the algo. If you bookmark the space, that'll also help it too. You can always take it off after the fact and then repost it and like it so we can get more people in here for the conversation today.
Absolutely. You're wondering what number you're at, Funky. I think you made the cut. You made the cut. You'll be delighted to know. No, I think you're above 50. Just shouting out a few people who I'm just going to pre-reveal. They were either at 50 or very, very close, and you kind of made the list. And as I said, it's not going to be like some hyper exclusive thing at the beginning. We just genuinely want to invite people who are super fans of the show. And so obviously, people who've been with us for longer, we want to make sure they are involved sooner. So just some people that I can see in the audience who will probably be a part of that, should they wish to be, is obviously, as you said, Kusho's like 100+ hours. that invitation is going to get extended, whether he likes it or not. Dow Jones was at 49.7. Shout out to DJ. So I think he's basically there, more or less. Again, there'll be more people than this, but this is just some off the top of my head. Signal, shout out to Signal, great friend. She is at about 50 as well. Greggy, next to Signal in the audience. Greggy is way past 50, absolutely smashing it. Vainada is way past 50 as well. But Vainada is actually a holder of our NFT, which we launched a project called Airdrop Season quite some time ago. So they're already in. So shout out to them. And actually, Signal, you can get in as well already if you want. Check the announcement in the Discord. Decrypto as well, one of our earliest supporters. Shout out to Decrypto. Decrypto is going to be in if they want to be. So that's just a little bit of a preview of where things are going, what things are moving towards, and we're going to get into all the headlines and stuff. But as we've had a bit of time to reflect on what we've achieved so far in 2023, 2024 is going to be a little bit more about coming together as a group of people, hopefully connecting all you guys. Because one thing we've noticed is, our experience is that the people who listen to us most, we really like, and we suspect you guys will like each other too. So we want to create a bit of a home and a hub, both online, but also in real life when we kind of go around the world, when we do these various conferences and things of that nature. So hopefully that is exciting, interesting prospect for people. Exciting. Any reflections, Funky, before I hit the news? What do you think? Sound good?
It all sounds good. And I just noticed in the comments that Kusho is also a teacher and he has a condenser microphone. So he is ready to be on the show and be part of this even more so in 2024.
I did not know Kusho was a teacher.
Me neither.
That's crazy. Okay. So basically this community is an exclusive community only for teachers or people in the educational profession.
Well, I think it's just lifelong learners in general, right? Like the people that the modern market draws in are insatiably curious people, right? They're people who are always wanting to tinker, always wanting to learn new things, play around with different protocols. I think that's the hallmark of lifelong learning, right? So that's maybe the common thread that binds us.
I think so. There's definitely something in that, like endless curiosity, wanting to learn more. And something that I've noticed, given that the modern market has started to get a little bit more attention and traction amongst other people, is that we're commonly described as like the most, not necessarily educational, but like one of the ones where you get the best information, or like it's up there, not necessarily the best, but just it's good on the information side, because there's all different types of shows, there's different types of spaces. But when it comes to information and like kind of downloading the information that you want, a bit of analysis of that seems to be our niche that we're carving out. So delighted to be doing that, delighted to be taking the next steps with you. You'll see some of those invitations start rolling out in the next week or so, but let's get into it. Well, this is an NFT market show. We're going to get into all of the news as always. Everything that I share with you is from the snapshot, which is pinned up top. I produce it every single day. If you do find that it brings you some value today, please consider giving it a like. So let's do it. Getting into the price action, let's start there. Bitcoin is down 4%, 43.1K. ETH down 6% at 2.2. Solana down 8% at 98. Ape is down 14% at 1.5. Remember, this was all down much more yesterday, but it's kind of bounced since. So this is actually a little bit of a recovery from the huge dump yesterday, which we reported live on. So still down, but not as bad as it was yesterday. Getting into NFT volume, we've got ETH at 9.6 million, Solana at 5.9, Bitcoin at 19.8. And our headlines for the day is number one, Matrix report, which caused market sell-off, widely criticized for publishing a bearish publication 24 hours after a bullish one. And a pretty amazing tweet, which I'm sure is going to be memed. The guy who wrote the report, called Marcus Thielen, replied to someone asking like why they reported it in the way that they did, and he just said, no, full stop, I changed my view. Really great image. That is going to be my stock response now for any change of opinions moving forward. Getting into the other headlines, we've got SEC holding meetings with exchanges to finalize the comments by Bitcoin ETF issuers. That seems to be more like everyone else seems to be super confident, so we want to touch on that in just a moment. And then on the NFT side, I thought this was an interesting and good one to discuss a little bit later. We've got the founder of The Plague hiring for an NFT founder in training. Thought it'd be interesting to discuss what that might look like, whether that's an interesting role, the mechanics of this higher. Very, very interesting. Is it necessary? Let's discuss in a little bit. Getting into the floor price action, we've got CryptoPunks at 56.5, up a percent. Bored Apes at 26.8, flat. Mutants at 5.1, DGods at 3.5, Captains at 4.2, up a few percent. Azuki's down 3% at 6.2, Penguins down a few percent at 10.8, Moonburns at 1.3, and Nouns at 8.7. Funky. That is the price action. Those are the headlines. Before we get into the headlines themselves, any numbers there in terms of the collections or any other price action that you are interested in?
I'm not the NFT analyst that you and Legendary are, so I probably wouldn't be qualified to comment on the movement of floor prices and stuff. But what I did find fascinating is that the SOL volume is continuing to stay almost apace with ETH. So even though that we've had this big drawdown in the prices and then the bounce back, and honestly the other thing too, yesterday, I think that just the emergency or disaster show was one of the best ones that we've had. We've talked about how these shows tend to be the best and how we crowdsourced all that knowledge. So, I think that the one thing that is to me is just shows that there's strength in the market is the continuing, like pace between ETH and SOL and the NFT markets and how those continue to be strong even when there's a downturn. So, curious to hear what others think about it as well.
Yeah, really interesting. It's a good point in terms now that that metric is kind of in our universe. Because the one thing that I notice when we do this analysis all the time, it's obviously very skewed in the direction where your attention goes. And for a long time, that metric was just not something that we reported on. And we started saying, at least 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, got to start reporting on SOL NFTs. And to be honest, still not doing it enough because there's legitimately collections that should be in the mix with it. I just haven't quite figured out what's the best way to incorporate those things. But yeah, Solana volume is still pretty good. It was not just on the NFT side, but the DEX volume on Jupiter, I think, has overtaken Ethereum DEX volume both at one point on the daily, on a weekly, and possibly even the monthly as well. We'd need to double check that. But just Solana's feeling very, very healthy. I know that it's obviously pulled back quite aggressively in the last day, but so did everything. So yeah, very, very encouraging in the Solana ecosystem. Is there anything that you've been picking out on the Solana side that's been of particular interest to you?
Not anything in particular. I was kind of surprised. I actually had probably, I'm not much of a flipper, but I had, I'm a member of Monkey DAO, for instance. So I had a couple Gen 3s and I actually listed one a long time ago. And one day I went into my wallet and I was like, where'd all this extra SOL come from? And I realized I actually sold one of my monkeys that I listed quite high. So I don't really do much in the ecosystem or like Magic Eden. I'm still kind of new to Solana in the sense that I'm just mostly a passive token holder. But yeah, I think that the vibrancy surrounding the chain is just, leading into this whole narrative of it being, a darling in this coming bull cycle. And, I think the numbers that we're already seeing are indicative of this as sort of the early stages.
Absolutely. Solana really, really encouraging across the board. Interesting stuff. Okay. One of the things I noticed, or that I've noticed recently, this is kind of a niche point because no one's really talking about it, is that the Bored Ape and the ape ecosystem volume, whilst it's still like up there at the top, and you might have noticed there was a huge mutant dump the other day, but according to people I've been speaking to, a lot of the Bored Ape volume is kind of just wash trading at the moment. There's just like people who are farming Blur making up the majority of that volume. But just notice that it's kind of dropped down beneath Azuki for a while. And we think that's because Azuki's got some kind of announcement coming up to their birthday, potentially. But not a lot going on, or not a lot of positivity from my perspective on the outside coming out of the Bored Ape ecosystem and some of the activity there. Do you have any stance on that? Like, is that just me observing from the outside? What's your thought there?
I mean, it's interesting because we kind of see, or at least I think most people see the Bored Apes as, the next tier down from the crypto punks in terms of blue chips. It's not surprising that there would be some kind of wash trading, especially between larger accounts. Tax seasons here. There could be. I saw the other day there was some kind of, and I don't know if it was you or Legendary that had tweeted it. This like kind of market where there's bargains where you can try and like snipe people who are wash trading, and they've caught some big collections where they'll list something for like 0.08 ETH or whatever, and grab a big piece. So, I mean, it's not all that surprising. I was kind of surprised to see it dip below 30 ETH again, because, I thought as the price of those recovered that they would continue to stay above that. But it seems like that it's dipped back down. But yeah, it's just I don't really have a whole lot of information about the community beyond that.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, I think I know some people haven't necessarily been happy with the execution on the Ape Coin DAO side. And one of the things that always seems to be the case is that these collections end up trading very much attached to the coin once that coin comes out of the bottle. And this was actually one of my concerns with Meme Land. And it's not actually a concern because I'm like bullish on the ecosystem, but it's funny when the NFT dropped the meme coin, I thought the NFT should have been worth more given all of the meme coin in it. But because the coin like wasn't moving up, then the NFT wouldn't move up either. So it's just one of those factors you need to factor in when you're trying to determine the price of the underlying asset, is that if there's a coin attached to it, it can become really like intrinsically attached in a way which is actually pretty annoying. And it kind of, I don't know. I like right now, if I was to look at the market and I'm out of the meme land trade, I made a little bit and I actually switched it to Mockaverse because I think that's I just thought it was a better trade for now. But I was looking at it thinking I think it should be higher, like versus all the other things. But then it was kind of, in my view, getting pinned down by the coin which was out there. And if that's not going to keep moving up, and especially when it was such a high price, because meme coins FTV was like two bill, or was it gone to 3 bill? I can't remember. But it's such a high price. Like, well, how much higher can it go realistically? So if you're thinking that the NFT is attached to that in some way, and the coin doesn't have a higher ceiling than where it's already at, then it's like, well, that means connected to that means that the NFT doesn't have a higher ceiling than where it's at. So you're kind of stuck in that scenario. If the coin actually, in the event the coin actually performs well, the NFT gets stuck because you don't have a higher ceiling. The coin can only go down, which will inevitably make the NFT go down, especially if you've got more allocation to come from that NFT, which is the case with the meme land coins, because they're all kind of wrapped up in there's a lot of meme wrapped up in the NFT. What are your reflections on that? What are your thinkings before we kind of get into some of the headlines?
No, that's really interesting, because when you said all that, the first thing that immediately popped into my head was Legendary talking about the yoga pets, because then we saw that similar surge where the day that we first mentioned on the show, I think they were somewhere around 0.1 for the unrevealed yoga pets. And now they've rebranded the Prana token to Well. And they continued to climb, because I remember pretty quickly they were like 0.3 and then 0.6, but they seem to have stalled out. Like I look at them every once in a while, it shows that they're about 0.7 as the floor. So I wonder if that level of speculation, or the speculation has kind of leveled off to like, okay, maybe this is about what this particular NFT will be worth for whatever Well token that I'll receive from a future airdrop. I never really even thought about that, like the connection of the coin to the collection itself and how that impacts the floor price. So maybe we're seeing that dynamic play out a little bit with the yoga pets.
Yeah, I think that's one to be aware of, especially because so many of these gaming tokens, and I think this is really, really important actually, because we spoke about this the other day. And to be honest, I think we're the only people who really spoke about it, which is a lot of these gaming NFTs which are coming to market, maybe other NFTs as well, but they're basically like pre-sales. They're basically like raises at a pre-sale. You buy your NFT with the people aren't necessarily saying this, but you've got the expectation of receiving a certain number of tokens. And that means that your NFT is obviously going to be heavily, heavily intrinsically linked to the price of that token whenever it comes. So I think more than ever, having an appreciation of the thing that we just discussed and like the connection between these two different types of assets, highly correlated. So important to bear that in mind. Any thoughts on that, Funky?
No, but it's a great, like to your point, something that anybody who's listening should be aware of. Just that there is that correlation there.
Sounds good. I think that is a thoughtful start to the show. Let's get into the first headline then, where we are going to deal with the matrix report, which we discovered yesterday. So just for the people who are not completely up to speed, yesterday the market completely tanked. Live on the show, I was going through the price action and Legendary interrupted me to say, no, that's not the price of Bitcoin. That's not the price of ETH. We tanked literally as I was speaking, and we kind of figured out what was going on. Community was amazing in the comments, giving us all the information that we needed. This matrix report was the cause of the market sell-off, it appeared. And we did the research. It seemed like they had produced one very bearish report yesterday morning, but 24 hours prior, they had produced a bullish report. And every mainstream publication seemed to run with it in some way, sometimes creating some really devilish headlines, making it sound way worse than it was, creating this sell-off. So since then, there's been a reasonable amount of criticism of the report, of the analyst. As we just said, the analyst actually replied to one of the senior journalists at Bloomberg to just very simply state that he changed his view. That's what happens. And you're allowed to change your view. And on some level, I don't disagree with him. You are allowed to change your view. It was just very suspicious and a strange thing to see play out in real time. So that's kind of where we were. Funky, any first reflections on that kind of crazy 24 hours, the publication of the report? Then kind of want to talk about it from a media perspective and like the extent to which we as media people have an obligation to report wisely on things which other people report. And I'm going to check what our title of our spaces was yesterday to make sure we're not sinning in the same way. What do you think?
The Giga Dump title. So I just wanted to note how volatile Bitcoin is, because I was going to say, when you started speaking, when I was about to come in, we were up about $36. And then I looked again, we were actually down about $16. So maybe we talking about it doesn't have any kind of impact. But I think that yesterday was a clear demonstration for how fickle these markets are, for how unregulated they are, for how easy it is to, manipulate the market. If you can see that there's a ton of open interest, we know that a lot of the movement that's happened over the last 2 to 3 months has been, generally, yes, we knew that there's sort of a buy the rumor, the ETF was coming, but then there's all these levered longs, right? Like you have people who continue to push the market up the price, even though there's not a lot of spot being bought. So when you get to these outrageous levels of open interest, it's quite famous for, major exchanges to go on liquidity hunts, even against their own customers. They know who's longing, who's shorting. They can just whip the market around to kind of, stop out people. And I think that, and again, not to say that anybody from Matrixport was trying to do this, but it begs the question, right? Like, did somebody write a report and then do this, intentionally to kind of reverse the markets so that maybe, people at centralized exchanges could make money, maybe that they had positioned with a hedge and they were short themselves so that they could make money on the way down and then long it on the bounce. I mean, like, there's any number of possibilities, but I think it just speaks to just the nature of where we are and how early all of this is when it comes to the market. And I think it also just draws to the point of how we always start the show, that this is a dangerous kind of place to play around in the crypto market. It's incredibly volatile, and we have to be aware of that. This is exactly why I don't trade, for instance. I'm just like a spot hodler kind of person.
Really, really nice analysis, particularly the stuff on open interest. I want to just double tap on that for a second, because it's one of the things which I'm probably newer to as well since I've joined the space. My understanding, this is like my reading of the situation based on what more experienced people than me have said. And I want to hear if you think I'm getting it right, Funky. Basically, in this scenario and in similar scenarios, when the market gets too long, and by that I mean people using leverage to bet on it going up um, with more confidence than they do, everyone, like all the people who, all the kind of exchanges can see that, right? Because they can see those bets being placed. And whenever that open interest gets too high, that just becomes an indication to the market that everyone's getting a bit too greedy. And so the market turns on it in order to take that leverage out. That's my like simplistic understanding. And that's why I've seen a lot of more prominent traders, people like OSF and Mando, almost exclusively talk about open interest as a way to determine whether we go up or down. Like when open interest is really high, they just, this is a simplistic reading. I'm not saying 100% what they said, but it seems to be the case when open interest is very high, people are thinking that we just go down. When open interest is lower, or like people are a bit more content in whatever they're holding, not using leverage, then we are going higher. What do you think about that? What do you think about open interest as an indicator of where the market is about to go?
Well, you have to look at both sides. I mean, that is right. That basic synopsis is right. I mean, you have to look at sort of which open interest it's leaning to, right? Because the
Sure.
shorts are paying the longs to hold their trades open, and vice versa. And as that gets more lopsided, um, you could see the volatility traveling either direction. You could have the quote unquote short squeeze where the bears are piling on, but then there's more longs that come in, they end up wiping them out, and you get these crazy God candles. And then same to the downside. I mean, ultimately, the good thing is, and all of it is as scary as it is, although yesterday, I think many of the people who are modern market listeners were kind of just like yawn. I mean, this is nothing new for anybody who's been in this space for a couple years, or at least a full cycle. This kind of correction doesn't even make us like upset at all. And I think it's healthy, because as that open interest builds up, it kind of gives a false indication for the price, if you will, which is usually the metric that we only care about. But I think, with the ETF coming, which I know we're going to touch on, that's going to drive up spot demand and everything else. And so this is, I think, a perfectly healthy correction. And it was a really strong sign that we didn't dip below 40K. I think that was the thing that everybody was, even the guy who I changed my view, that put out his crazy bearish chart. And he's like, oh, when this gets rejected, it's going to go here. And it was somewhere in that 37, 38K range. So, I ultimately, I think that this is a good thing. What happened, maybe the way that it shook out was kind of perplexing, but, that's where it brings up all the conversations around manipulation and everything else.
Absolutely. I think that's an amazing summary for the people who are newer to this concept of open interest, which is obviously a slightly more advanced way to go about trading, right? Most people just think they're going to buy something and hold it and then sell it or continue to hold it. Whereas this is slightly more advanced. So that's super helpful for those listening in. Kusho, can see you reacting off and on there in agreement. What are your thoughts on this particular move?
GM. So like Funky said, I do agree that it's a healthy shakeout, because the market it definitely wasn't going to go up and up. But I think it's one of these things where something happens in the market, and we definitely, one way or the other, have to find some reason to justify it, even though it's something that was always going to happen. So I think a pullback like this is necessary. It's also good for me because I get to get some like nice low entries back into Solana and into Prime and a few other things. So I was able to move a lot of money around yesterday just because the market pulled back. So that was fine for me. I mean, perfect day.
Yeah, one of the things that I was very encouraged by actually was the comments from on our show when the market was nuking, where people were either super informative and super helpful or really funny in the comments. So clearly no one was particularly stressed, which must mean as a community, we are like one of the less levered communities. I don't know that anyone here got liquidated on anything. So that was very encouraging. That was just a fun thing to see. Funky, you touched on whether this is good or bad. And I saw a tweet on this yesterday, which I'm going to share for the people on YouTube, but we'll read it out as well for those that are listening on X. I had this tweet from OSF, which suggested that this is ultimately a positive thing. He said, after yesterday's wipeout, I'm definitively more bullish on price action post an ETF approve, which in his opinion, is less than a week now. Positioning is cleaner and there is enough doubt in the air for it to have more of a positive price impact. What do you make of that kind of that analysis that it's way better that this stuff got wiped out now, and now we've got this kind of cleaner positioning?
Yeah, I mean, I completely concur with this take. I think that ultimately, if this were precipitated by negative news, right? Like, and the ETF does get approved, as most of us still expect for it. That, I think OSF has a point. It's going to then kind of bring us back up into that next level. There's a lot of talk about, if the ETF gets approved, are we going to see another major candle? Are we going to push past 50K? But I think it does kind of clear away the space and make it for, a cleaner positioning. And I don't think it's obviously not going to happen where all these ETF providers are going to just be gobbling up spot all at the same time, all at once, right? Like, many of these things are going to happen via OTC deals so that they don't really move the price too much. And I think they're going to be doing this in tranches over time. It's not like all of a sudden they're just going to buy, via spot, and, whether it's Van Eck or State Street or Fidelity or you name it, or Bitwise, because, has that great commercial.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I want to move on to the second headline, which is a little bit more of a procedural one, in the sense that there seems to be some like legitimate steps being taken to get this ETF show on the road. First, we had Eleanor Terrett, and again, this is all on the YouTube video for the people watching if you want to see this, but for the people listening, she reported that the SEC is holding meetings today with exchanges, which is the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, to finalize comments on the applications submitted by the Bitcoin spot ETF issuers. And the reason why I think that was, well, the significance of that, is that was provided by Eric Balkunas, who I believe has been very prominent actually in this whole Bitcoin ETF process. He's a senior ETF analyst at Bloomberg. And he said, things you probably don't do if you are going to deny or delay hearing similar, and why we have seen the updated application, in that it is a sign of approval imminent, as SEC has been doing back and forth with issuers offline to perfect their application versus doing numerous refilings. So that seems to indicate that we are very much kind of getting close to the moment in time where this is going to get given the green light. And I guess just addressing the previous article, which caused yesterday's sell-off, which was predicting that it will not be approved, this kind of more concrete evidence from people who seem to be more connected seems to suggest otherwise. What are your reflections there on either the process or the outcome?
I think with Eric Balkunas in particular, like, I don't know if it was that particular thread, but I read a few of these things in the aftermath of what happened yesterday. And there were other people chiming in who know about the situation and just indicating more positive views that, two of the current, like, what constitutes the committee in the SEC that will actually like vote on letting these things go through. They already said, like, two have already signaled that their intent is to push this through. So it made it sound like they only really needed one more person to do so. So just all of these things that keep building up, such as the things that Eric mentioned in his own post, that, you wouldn't go through these particular motions if you weren't ready to just actually launch the ETF or signify that, it's getting approved. Right. Because, like I was just saying a moment ago, it's going to take a while for the ETF to form. But, I trust the people who are in the know. I mean, I think this is one of the problems with Web3, is that bad information gets quickly exacerbated because we live in this crazy sort of echo chamber. And I think too, it's easy because we've been through a long bear market for people to just say, like, oh, it's not going to happen. This is just another disappointment. So, I would just encourage people who are feeling that way to just, wait for it to happen. There's nothing to do one way or another. Just wait for the day to show up, and we're going to find out one way or another. So there's no point in getting too emotionally overwrought about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the psychology of all of it, where people are genuinely able, and look, ultimately it's not over the line yet, right? It's not over the line yet. You can only go on the facts that are presented to you and try to draw conclusions from that. But it's just funny how when it comes to this trade or any other type of trade, sometimes the more that you think about it, the more you overanalyze it, kind of start to create reasons and create an analysis that doesn't even exist on the facts. And sometimes you've got to try to strip away all other people's opinions. I've read a lot about, I'd be interested to hear what your process is for this. I've heard a lot about how like Twitter is obviously this kind of hive mind and you've got so many different opinions all the time and so many things that are going to influence your opinion. Obviously you have certain people who you elevate above all other people and they might have a particular type of opinion which you then subscribe to. But then there's still a bunch of other people who, if there's enough people, sometimes that can sway you too. How do you deal with just managing your information flow? And is there actually any time where you're like, "Do you know what? I need to cut down because there's too much noise here rather than signal." That's something I actually did quite recently. I started cutting down my followers, my following. No, hang on, the other way around. The people who I follow, because I'm just trying to get a few less opinions. Just because I found there's too many. There's too many opinions, and actually they're either similar or they're different. But the point is, I just need fewer in order to be able to competently analyze them and draw my own. What's your thought on that process?
I mean, it's great advice. And one thing I was going to say, sometimes an underutilized tool on X is creating lists. So, you know, if you wanted to maintain those followers, you could just create a curtailed list of the people that you really want to make sure that you see every single day, you know, when it comes to their particular informed opinion or, you know, his or her analysis on the current market dynamics. You know, for me as someone, because I think I'm a little older, I really don't pay too much attention to, you know, individual opinions. I think it's more important to read the broader market sentiment, looking at narratives, those sorts of things. One thing too, this will be my third sort of run, if you will. And the key difference I'm going to do this time is actually have a plan in terms of taking profits and having things written down. So that way because we've all been there, right? Like we've all seen our bags pump to crazy numbers and the euphoria sets in and it's like, oh, it's going to get to X. And then X never happens. And so I think it's wise to, yes, listen to what others are telling you, you know, be part of these dialogues. This is the thing I love about the modern market, right? Like this is effectively an open dialogue among the community here in Web3 about just everything that's happening in the market. So having these kinds of conversations, I think really does help. But at the end of the day, you as an individual are ultimately the arbiter of your own choices and actions. And I think that's really where we, as, you know, people who are on the show should be telling those who are listening, right? It's at the end of the day, you're the one pressing buy or sell, you know, not financial advice, of course, but that's my point.
Absolutely. Super pro responsibility and taking it all on your own shoulders. Ultimately, that's one of my big things. An interesting point that you said you're on your third cycle. Just wanted to touch on that before we get on. We want to check in with Kusho as well, who's got something to say on that. I've heard something where, I don't know, this is probably like a simplistic way of looking at different cycles. But one way is, you know, your first cycle, you round trip everything. Second cycle, you make a bit of money. And the third one is where you really make a killing. Is that how it's played out for you actually? And is that what I mean, obviously that's your intention now that it's your third one, but is that like roughly how it played out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. You know, the quickest version of this story I can tell is that one of my bright students who went on to be a UC Berkeley CS major. He wanted to create a distributed ledger technology in the fall of 2016 to do a micro lending thing. And then he came up to me and he was like, Bitcoin in the spring. And I'm like, what about Bitcoin? He's like, that's the first blockchain. And I was just that guy, like just FOMO'd in, bought some Bitcoin, bought some ETH, held it all right to stopped paying attention in the bear market. The biggest lesson I'll listen, anybody who's listening right now, the number one lesson is never quit when the bear comes. That's when you make real relationships. That's when you forge these friendships that'll probably last for many years to come. you'll always, you know, we've talked a lot on the show about sort of the informational totem pole and having a position to where you can have that asymmetric kind of reaction that is all built during the bear. And so that's the thing that, to your point, yes, the second run, I was smart about taking profits, probably didn't take nearly enough. So the third, this time around, I feel as if no coin is sacrosanct, not Bitcoin, not ETH. Lots of stuff is going to get sold, regardless of, you know, like how much we love it philosophically. Because at the end of the day, we would like to change our lives with this coming, you know, theoretical run that's about to show up on our doorstep.
That's amazing. Really, really helpful stuff. Funny to think about it in that way, but like it really resonates with me a lot. And that thing about the bear, I mean, I'd only been through one cycle. I joined in the bull and I've been through one bear. So in some ways, I mean, that doesn't actually play out for me entirely, like that model. But the thing that resonates most with me is, I mean, frankly, the only stuff we've really done is just been during the bear, because the bull market, you don't really know what you're doing. That was like, you had no idea what you're doing. Things get so hard to stay on top of. And then in the bear market, you just have this opportunity to actually get your head down and do stuff. And I mean, me and Legendary launched our first project on the day ETH crashed to like $1,000. And the funny thing about it is, like, we made a certain amount of money from it. Well, I think we did like $20,000 of passes sales. However, because ETH was so damn low, like that's how much it was. When we had projected to do it, like that literally would have been like $40,000 if we had just launched, you know, 14 days before or something crazy. But it shows, like, even in the timing of the market can have wild implications for everything that you're doing. So very, very interesting to think about that. But the fact that we did it, and we were just like, this is very personal stuff, but we were like wrapping up our accounts recently as we were getting to the end of the year, dealing with, you know, all of that project work and just wrapping it up. And we thought, like, all of that money we invested was clearly not like the best investment in terms of financial gain, because we barely made anything, frankly. But like the tuition that we paid, like, we're just seeing that as tuition, because we learned so much by launching on the day when everything was crashing. We learned so much by having a Discord, like going to marketing, how to try to keep things alive when interest was down. Like, whatever we paid, that was just like our tuition fee. And yeah, I mean, I know we've gone a little bit off topic here, but that just resonated with me, what you said about sticking around so that you're able to capitalize when the time's right. Any final thoughts on that, Funky, before we throw it to Kusho?
Two quick things. No better teacher than experience, right? Lived experience is always going to trump everything. And the other thing I would say is, don't belittle the fact that you've been through one bear, because I would argue you've been through the bear. Like, this has been a long, brutal slog. I think this is why the market's just so frothy. People are excited, you know, like, oh my gosh, the number's going up, you know? So it's just, but you've done, just the fact that you've become this successful and entering at the beginning of the previous bull says a lot about you.
Appreciate it, man. And I think there's lots of people in this audience who, you know, shout out to everyone sticking around, staying curious, trying to stay knowledgeable, in order to be able to execute when the time's right. Just shout out in the comments to Miss A. She said, oh, I assume they say, everyone has opinions. However, it's really about viewing it from the helicopter view and then drilling down to the minutia where appropriate. Definitely agree with that. Can't get caught up in too many people's opinions when it comes to making these analysis. Hip Square also came in and said, fully agree, using XList to manage noise. I've lists for different chains. Interesting approach, taking kind of a chain perspective. Sometimes people sort by topics. Interesting stuff. Super helpful thoughts there. Kusho, want to throw it to you now. What are your thoughts on the conversation we were having?
So I mean, this is one of the things where experience really shines through, just from the conversation that you guys have had. It's really, really amazing the amount of things you can glean from someone who has been through 1, 2, 3 cycles. I think this is my second cycle, but my first active one. So it's like, this is the one where I'm actually participating, and the previous one wasn't so much of participation. It was more like just observing what was going on in the markets for me. And that was where I kind of, solidified my conviction on, Web3, everything crypto. For me, it's kind of like this is one of the things that matter the most, which is like being able to manage your attention, because there's no shortage of things that are happening in the market at every single time in so many different sectors all at the same time. So it's kind of like one of these things where your attention is usually weighted to the amount of interest that you have in a particular person. So like if you are really invested in, let's say, B-Check or Funky, for example, there's a very huge probability that when you see a tweet from them, you're going to take that with more weight than a tweet that you saw from someone else. So it's one of these things. I think it's a subconscious thing. It's not really a conscious thing, but it's something that you have to bring into your awareness so you don't get easily swayed by someone just because you like them. Um, it also happens a lot because we see people like influencers like Ben Eat and the likes who like put out stuff, and just because of there's that social proof, like there's that traction around them, you assume that everybody who is interacting with them also knows what they are doing. Meanwhile, it's very possible to have 2,000 people in the replies who have no fucking clue what they are doing in the space. So it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
And lastly, I wanted to touch on like my own personal experience, which was like, to me, the most important thing in the space is to be an active part of the space. It doesn't matter what form or shape that
Mm.
is. If it is contributing to a DAO, if it is creating content, if it is supporting other creators, whichever way it is, just make sure that it is something where you are invested in the space, because you could easily get thrown around just by not having people who know you. So, for example, one way for me to put this is like, my gaming journey in the Web3 space has been amazing simply because one of my closest interactions in the space is artists. I also have Yaikan, a couple of people that are part of very prominent gaming DAOs. And as a result of that, I've gotten access into playtests for some really cool games.
Mm.
I can play Parallel, I can play Oh Baby Cats, which also has very scarce invites. So it's like one of the things where being active lets people see you, let people know that, okay, this person is around. It doesn't matter if you formed your niche, eventually you will. But as a starting point, it's very important that you get out there, get to know people, get to
Yeah.
connect with people, even if you're not financially yet invested in the space.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure. Like I think one of the things people might think sometimes is if there's like a big discrepancy between financial positions, which sometimes might be something people think when they see certain people like, I don't know, flexing a certain amount on Twitter. Like what people have to appreciate is like people are really looking for talented people all the time. And you mentioned the idea of like just being active and doing things. That's like really hard to find. Like even in the position we're in now, where we might be looking for like trying to sort a few position, not like active positions in the modern market, but we might need a little bit of a help at some point. But it's difficult to find people who you can trust and who are going to show up and be routine like all the time. One of the hardest things to find. So completely resonate and agree with that message from Kusho. Stay active, stay curious, and do things. That is good advice. I want to get into the Web3 roundup to bring people up to speed with everything else that's been happening in the last 24 hours. And then we've got our final headline to touch on. We'll just have a little bit of time for that, where we're going to talk about this pretty interesting new role that the Plague are going to start, of like a Web3 founder in training. Interested to hear what people's opinions are on that. But let's get into the snapshot. As always, the news is always there. First piece of news, which is pinned up top. Number one, Go West BTC sweeps 50 doodles. So the doodles floor is now up to 1.95 ETH. Wonder what people think about that decision. Big doodles fan. So that's pretty cool. Number two, Node Monkeys flip Bitcoin frogs. Finally, floor price at 0.25 BTC versus 0.22 BTC. People kind of called that a little bit ago. That's cool to see. Next, Arbitrum Xi Games token Xi introduced to the Binance launch pool. Definitely got an eye on Xi. I bought one of their nodes. They seem to be cooking something very good on Arbitrum, and the gaming narrative there is heating up, particularly with the reboot protocol from Pixel Vault as well. Talking of Pixel Vault, they just announced prominent artists as cultural collaborators, including ACK, Bat, and Brian Brinkman. It's like really, really top tier collaborators for their gaming ecosystem. And finally, some more news from around the space. Web3 education platform Fluid, which is founded by Loopify, announced their beta launch today. And also Avant Art announced William Mapan release for 2024. Really high quality physical work that they're always bringing to market. That is the Web3 roundup. That is everything else that you might need to get on top of what's happened in the past 24 hours. Want to touch on that final headline, Funky, and hopefully bring in Swizzy, who's up top with us as well, very knowledgeable on all things NFT projects and communities, and kind of discuss what this means. So the quick top line summary is that Pons, who is the founder of the Plague NFT project, shared that he's hiring for a position of NFT founder in training. Will probably they said that this person will not be taking over the Plague, so that's not something people need to worry about. But what they will get as part of this position is, number one, mentoring on how to run a business first and an NFT project second. Number two, support from the best NFT community in the industry. Number three, pay while in their position, which will be variable like the rest of the team. And four, an NFT project of your own, which is not the Plague, to run when you are done, or your idea if it is good for a project, or ours if you don't have a good idea. Let's stop there. That's quite a lot to digest. Pretty interesting concept here, Funky. What are your initial thoughts of hiring an NFT founder in training?
Actually, I mean, as goofy as the title sounds, I love the idea, right? Because it's we see it time and again. Look at yesterday, what happened on the Modern Market Show. You can lean into this Web3 crowd and crowdsource something else. Like in this case, a particular person to step up and find a role, right? Like if somebody like Pons is coming out and saying this, laying out the criteria, there's going to be a lot of people out there who maybe have good ideas, who maybe are good public spokes. You know, one of the things about founders, the argument is always that the person should be very public, should be always talking about the project, extolling the virtues of it, what sort of value it's going to have for those who are going to be holders in the future. You know, so I think this is a really interesting way to go about advertising, especially to do it on, well, I mean, I guess what you call it, CX now instead of crypto Twitter, but like just this whole idea of putting it out there in the world and see what happens, see what comes back to you. I really think this is an interesting, novel way to do this in Web3.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. I mean, on some level, that's how the whole rest of the world works, right? Like for every single thing that you want to do at some point in time, there is a training process. Whether that's you want to be a doctor, okay, well, you go to uni for this number of years, you do this amount of training, whether it's being a lawyer, a teacher, even more vocational things. You want to be a plumber, you know, you've got to do this amount of training. There's something about the entrepreneurial space there where it's like, can you teach that? I don't know. Obviously, you have business school where people go and kind of get into the weeds of the academic side of it and try to learn the formulas and metrics for success and then try to replicate that in some way. My observation of business schools though is that they're not really training founders. They train like the next level of senior C-suite, like not middle managers, senior management, but they're not the people that drive things forward in the way that founders do. So I'm not actually aware of something that is appropriate for founders. What's your thought on that? Do you think there is a gap for education of the highly entrepreneurial people? Is it even possible? Then want to go to Swizzy, who's got their hand raised.
I can only give from my very personal experience. I completely agree with you in the sense that I don't think you can really just like create courses for how to be a founder, right?
Correct.
There is something to be said, and the key word he put in there was mentorship or just being a mentor. And as someone who came from a 20-year classroom career, having no sort of exposure to the business world, but just being a ceaselessly curious person, now I work for a startup, and I will say that our two co-founders, they're just like serial entrepreneurs, and they recognize in me sort of this entrepreneurial mindset, and they're trying to mentor and nurture that. And it's not something you're going to get from a book, but only through experience and having it passed on, right? Like I guess I'm some sort of Padawan, right? And they're the Jedi and they're just training me. So I think it can be done ultimately, right? Like they can see instincts, they can kind of hone that and help you get to where, they see the potential and they want to help mold that. So I think it is something that can be done ultimately.
I like that idea. I way prefer that concept of mentorship rather than top down, like this is how you do it as an entrepreneur, because I've had conversations recently with people who are like trying to dabble in the space. And it seems like people genuinely think of the world differently. Like if you're not that way aligned, or if you're not thinking about the world in that way, not saying that you can't do it, but you need to do it yourself. Like there has to be something internal to you that really wants this stuff, because this is not easy. This game is not easy when you just go off and branch off completely alone. So that was my thinking, but I like the idea of framing it in terms of mentorship. Swizzy, your hand is raised. What is your thought on the NFT founder in training concept?
Two thoughts on that, because I have to jump out quickly after that. I can really add to what Funky said. Having mentorship is what I had to learn myself as well. Long time I was going the way alone until I realized there are areas I have less knowledge or I'm not an expert on. That's why I picked up a mentor myself. It was a close friend who has founded many companies. And is a founder right now as well. So this is helping me as well to navigate. But I see another side of it as well, and I hope they do it to let's say share the process, which I see as a content for them, but also maybe to inspire others to do the same. So to let's say motivate other probably entrepreneurs to start their journey.
Interesting. Yeah, I like it. I like that idea. This idea of mentorship seems to be the one that resonates a little bit more with people. So that's probably the way to frame it. Guys, we have run out of time for today's show. Great discussion as always. Thanks for that, Swizzy. Kusho, I appreciate you wanted to come in. Also, Miss A, I just seen that you had requested. Sorry, we run out of time for today. Hopefully we can get you up another time. Admin is a little bit harder for me when Legendary isn't here to take on some of that admin stuff, but it's been a great show. Great conversation, great show as always. Please do have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and we will see you back tomorrow, 7 a.m., 12 p.m. GMT, 7 a.m. Eastern time. Have a wonderful day. Take care. We will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.